Welcome back to St Mary's Field Museum. This is a space where we're able to bring the public in and show people a little bit about what we're doing here. In this film, we're actually going to break out of the tent and we're going to go up into the fields around us, and we're going to find out a little bit more about what's happening in the wider landscape here, and we're going to go and meet the archaeologists who are going to tell you a little bit more about the work that they've been doing.
The site here is important because obviously we have the remains of around, we think, 3,000 people within the St Mary's churchyard, and obviously the building of the church itself. But also it's important because we have the edge of a possibly prehistoric but certainly Roman settlement, and as well as a lot of medieval, principally what we've found so far, 13th, 14th century use near the entrance to the site. We didn't find that the church was the centre of a medieval village, but the land here has been in quite heavy use from at least the Roman period.
So where we are now is on the ridgeline to the east of the church, which is basically a huge site all behind me up to the green fence, where we knew from geophysics and previous work that we were expecting what's called a ladder settlement, which is a kind of 2,000-year-old kind of settlement structure. And when we came to strip the site, we did indeed find that, but what we also found was some evidence of some earlier activity on the site, where we found some remains of field systems that were probably dating to the prehistoric period, and some roundhouses structures that, again, we're looking at the prehistoric period. Some of the pottery may have been Bronze Age in date, particularly one small pit we found which had a placed pot in it, and this probably dates to the Middle Bronze Age, which is about 1500 BC. So the landscape we're looking at here is, we kind of knew it was in use 2,000 years ago, but actually we can show now that it was in use 3,500 years ago. So the area around the churchyard, the field around the churchyard, is what we're referring to as Area 24. What we found was evidence of a large ditched enclosure, actually with a double ditch. So an inner ditch and bank, and an actual larger one outside that. It's quite possible that these watercourses already existed, and that the east-west running ditches were then added cutting into these. The most significant structure that we found during the strip of Area 24 was this big barn, which had a beam slot construction and a postal construction. What we also found around that was a drip gully, which is basically to pull water away from the overhanging kind of eaves of the roof. But we also had these 6 really big post holes at the end of it. What we're wondering and suggesting is that this altogether actually makes a large barn with a raised platform at the end of it, which may well have been for grain storage or corn storage. So you're basically keeping that stuff up high away from rats and other animals that are eating it.
So the work being undertaken behind me is another one of our archaeological areas. From the trial trenching that we did back in 2018, we identified some Roman water management ditches, and also we had some medieval activity which seems to have been more of a domestic nature.
Well, in this area where we are at the moment, there was a large amount of medieval activity. It was a very wet, sticky environment, so it wasn't a particularly high status site, with houses, some pits, some rubbish pits, some boundary ditches. We have one of the final phases of the excavation here revealed a 15th century warrener's lodge, which was unusual as it contrasted quite strongly with the material that was already there, which in itself is quite a high status structure. There aren't that many found in the UK, but it does indicate that there was quite a lot of wealth, and it was owned by the lord of the manor and occupied by the chap that was responsible for looking after his rabbits, which was a very important source of food at the time. One of the primary targets of investigation for this area of the excavation is that how the church fits into the wider landscape, who was using the church, why the church was there, who paid for the church, and how they paid for the church. So looking at the archaeology surrounding the church is as important as the church itself.